Hi, I'm Carol Fitzgerald from the readinggroupguides.com, a website from the Book Report Network, and the host of Book Reporter Talks To video series. And I want to welcome you to our first ever Bookaccino Live Book Club event, where our guest this evening is Jeanine Cummins, the author of the New York Times bestseller American Dirt, which has sold 1.3 million copies worldwide during a pandemic. Also, everybody keep that in mind, and has been translated into 40 languages since it came out in January. And we were joking that we're not sure if we know what all 40 languages are, like what are 40 languages? It's funny because January seems like a lifetime ago. And even more long ago to me was the June of 2019 when I sat down and read this book. And I remember exactly where I was sitting on the patio outside, and I walked inside the house and I said, this is like one of the best books I've read. This is one of the best books of the year, and I can see where it's going to be set up for next year. And I was just so excited about it. It's an Oprah Book Club selection, and just this week we learned that it's a finalist in the Goodreads reader poll that is reader, let's see, what is it? The reader poll, Jeanine, is that what it is?
Goodreads Choice Awards.
Goodreads Choice Awards in the fiction, it's a fiction finalist. And that is really exciting news. And it's also one of my Book Reporter Bets On selections. So we've got so much excitement about this book. You know, when I devoured it, I was so eager to share it with readers. And last fall, we hosted a Reading Group Guides contest where 10 groups won copies of this book. And we wanted to get their feedback. We actually selected groups from all over the country because we wanted to see like what the radar was and what their feelings were. And it was across the board raves for the book. Just wonderful things. And here's some of the things they had to say. The Boulevard Book Group from Westfield, New Jersey said, "We find it current, educational, and an emotional roller coaster. The pace was breathtaking. It was hard to put down, but at the same time, it made us nervous about what we would see next." Briarcliff Book Club from Fort Thomas, Kentucky said, "The character development, horror of the circumstances, and the heart-beating journey kept us mesmerized from the first page. There were so many important moments, relationships in the book, and we loved that Lydia was an owner of a bookshop." The Woodbury Book Club from Woodbury, Minnesota had one sentence and thought that resonated with everyone. "I always thought of immigrants as those people, but not anymore." The Sakura Trails Book Group from Peoria, Illinois said, "As residents of Arizona, we could all relate to the hot, blistering sun as El Chaco guides them through the desert. The group includes a wide spectrum of political opinions, and we had a great discussion." And I've got two more. Sherry of the Read and Feed Book Club from Bluefield Hills, Michigan said, "It's a story of immigration, a mother's story, and it's about the kindness of strangers. The novel is gut-wrenching and eye-opening." And finally, Feckin Book Club from Cedar Rapids, Iowa said, "It's a book that any person of privilege needs to read." So the format for tonight is going to be as follows. I want to note that we're assuming that everyone here has read the book. So if we give away spoilers, we're assuming you read. That's the reason you're coming to book club. You didn't just come for the wine. So we're assuming that that's what's going to be happening. And we're going to begin. I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion with Jeanine. And then 8 members of the audience are going to pop up and each ask their questions as well. And then we're going to turn to Q&A from the audience. So as the evening goes on, if you have a question in the Q&A down below the screen, please drop your questions in there so that can be shared with the panelists. And with that all housekeeping behind me, welcome, Jeanine. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a long time coming, Carol, right? We were supposed to have this conversation many months ago, and so I'm happy to finally be having it.
Me too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, yes, because we're finally getting to talk about the book that took you 5 years to write. I mean, everybody sits down and says, "Oh, this book, it just came out." And I think that often readers think that what they see on the page happened in a linear fashion. Like, oh, she just sat down, she started writing. But I know from other interviews that this book had a lot of stops and starts. It had a lot of putting aside, coming back to. So let's start by you sharing a little bit about those 5 years and what the journey was of writing the book.
Yeah, that's a great place to begin. I think you know, it's funny when you talk to people who aren't writers and that idea that a book can happen in a linear fashion. I mean, maybe some people write that way. It sounds like a dream to me. And to be sure, this book was, the journey of getting to the finished product was a lot more convoluted than my previous novels. I wrote 2 complete drafts of this book, full, like 80,000 word drafts that went in the garbage wholesale before I began the draft that became American Dirt. And there were a lot of reasons for that. I think I was trying to force a round peg into a square hole for a long time. I knew that I wanted to write about compulsory migration in the Americas. And I was really afraid of writing a book set in Mexico. So I tried to write this book set in the borderlands initially. Those first 2 drafts were both set in the borderlands. And there was no Lydia. Luca was the only character. I was writing from a round robin point of view. And I would send the book out, you know, the chapters that I was writing, I would send it out to writer friends of mine, and they would invariably read the chapters, and they would all say the same thing. They would say, I don't care about anyone in this book except Luca. I resent everyone on the page who takes me away from Luca. I want to know that he's okay. I want to go back to his origin story. And I really resisted doing that for a long time. You know, it was tremendously research intensive, this book, and we can talk more about that later. But you know, there was a lot of behind the scenes work also that was going into it. And as I was learning, I was discarding what felt false to me after the research. And I was just really frustrated with the way, about 3.5 years in, the way that the book was developing, or not developing really. I knew that it wasn't working, but I was very resistant to going back and setting the book in Mexico. For a number of reasons. And, you know, I questioned my capacity to do that. I didn't know if I had the wherewithal. I didn't know if I had the chops. You know, I understood how my limitations as a writer and what a tall order that was going to be, among other things. I was resistant. And then there was the moment that changed everything for me. And that was the week before the 2016 presidential election. My mom and dad went out to dinner one night with a big group of friends, and my dad died at the dinner table in the restaurant.
Awful.
And he was 71 years old, in the prime of his life, really a young 71. He wasn't sick. He was like kind of larger than life character in his community. And we all thought we had like decades left with him. So it was a real shock when he died, and the way that he died. And I have had really significant trauma in my life before. When I was a kid, I thought I knew how to grieve. I thought I was really good at it. I thought I was tough, like I could handle anything. But when my dad died, I was a mess. Like it really incapacitated me for a long time. And I was so angry at the book because I felt like I had wasted time on this thing that I could have spent with my dad. And so I put it away, and I kind of put everything away. I couldn't even read during that time. I didn't have the emotional reservoir for stories. And I just pushed it all away. And then, you know, then a week later, we had this incredibly divisive, angry election in our country. I had a strong feeling that like sort of all the decency had gone out of the world at once. And I was really depressed in a way that I've never been before. And it took me a few months to get out of that despair. And that was the thing really that changed the whole trajectory of this book for me, because when I began at last to kind of emerge from that dark place, I I had a sense that maybe I could write my way out of it.
Mhm.
And so that was the thing. I dragged my laptop into bed with me one day and I wrote the opening scene of American Dirt. And I didn't know at the time that I was starting over again, that this was going to be the book. But I think I knew immediately when I had written that scene that this was the book I had been resisting for 3.5 years, that it was the book my dad would be proud of, and that it was the book I felt like was truly in my heart to write.
Mhm.
So shortly thereafter, a few weeks later, I rented a casita back in the borderlands in Arizona, deep in the desert. And I wrote almost half the book in like 8 days, I think.
Wow.
I'd been steeping,
Wow.
yeah, I had been steeping in this research for 3.5 years. I had done all these trips. I had learned so much, and it was kind of like dammed up in me. And when I felt like my grief kind of liberated me, it was like a springboard. And when I let go of all that resistance, the book just sort of came thundering out, for better or for worse, for better and for worse, I think,
Mhm.
what I've
Mhm.
decided.
But it was, it starts out with those 5 pages that quickly draw you into the story. I mean, you're like wham, and you're actually like turning the pages. I can't believe how I'm just opening into the story and how I'm falling into it. And that was always the start of this version,
Yeah.
this third version of what ended up happening. And it's interesting because I hadn't thought about Acapulco. Like I knew there was a lot of strife down in Mexico. I'm
Yeah.
not, but I had not thought about Acapulco. I had thought about, oh, that's still the vacation town. That's still whatever. And when I started reading, I was like, wait, this is a place I've seen tons of pictures of, and I know it's not a place where I just was picturing this. So we start out in this place where the reader is immediately pulled into the story.
Yeah.
When you show the writing group this, did they say, I think you nailed it?
Yes. Well, I remember sending it to my first reader, and he said, keep going, keep going, keep going. And that was the first real encouragement I had gotten. Whereas before there was a lot of like, eh, and that day he was like, yes. So, um, but I think I knew it even before I sent it to him.
Mhm.
I just knew, you know.
With your other books, had that happened? There are 3 other books. We're going to talk more about those later. But did you drop, like when you wrote those, did you know right away, or were there stops and starts on those as well?
There were stops and starts always. I unfortunately am that kind of writer. I think I'm always joking around with my other writer friends who like Mary Beth Keane is a good friend of mine, and she'll say like, I've learned nothing from writing a novel. Every time you start, it's like you're starting for the first time. And because every book is different. And I wrote The Crooked Branch, for example, with an outline, and my memoir I wrote with an outline, and then The Outside Boy in American Dirt I wrote without an outline. And neither one of those, like one was not a better experience than the other. It just, they were different books and they sort of called for different experiences, I think.
Yeah, and I think that everybody just thinks, oh, you just keep writing, and then there's a little editing that goes on, and they don't realize how the experience can be different with each book, and where you get stuck could be different in each book as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the beginning, sometimes it's the middle, and sometimes it's the end.
I think so much of it is about the psychology of the writer, and where you are in your trajectory of the story. And sometimes it's something as fundamental as the voice, and you have to just like completely start over.
Well, one of the things is Lydia is a middle-class woman, a bookseller. And what drew you to make her each of those things? That she was middle class and that she's the bookseller.
Yeah, it's funny. I always feel like when I'm answering questions about choices that I made in the writing, it always feels like I'm rummaging around in my own psychology for an answer. It's like I'm really throwing a dart at a dartboard because I don't know what made me. I can take a guess. Um, I think I know, but I wasn't thinking about it in this way when I wrote it. It's a retrospective view of what I was doing, and I can say, I worked in the food service industry for many years before I got into publishing. And in that in that endeavor, I worked with so many immigrants who were, frankly, washing dishes or bussing tables. And in getting to know them, I knew that a lot of them were, a certified public accountant in their home country, or a midwife, or, they certainly were not bussing tables. And so I know that I came into this story from that place of wanting to write against the stereotype, of wanting to interrogate the stereotype of the typical middle class reader and remind that person that migrants are not a monolith, that they are all unique individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So to be sure, that influenced who Lydia is. And I think whenever I did want her to be middle class, I think for that reason. I didn't consider all the ramifications of that decision, but as she evolved on the page, I liked the way that she could function in the story as a sort of lens and a translator. I liked that. And and I think whenever I think of a good life, of a comfortable, happy life, I think of books. So it was just, of course she would be a bookseller or a librarian, or, she would have a life in books. So that was just organic, I think.
Yeah. I was reading the discussion guide questions before this discussion because I usually don't get a look at those. And the term American, someone said, only appears once in the novel. And I assume that was intentional.
Yeah.
Was it?
It was, yes. I mean, so the word American is used as a modifier in the phrases Central American and American flag, but on its own, it's only used once. And yes, that was intentional. Latino people, and I have since come to understand as well, Canadian people have, there is some degree of, I don't know, irritation might be too strong a word. I guess it depends on who you ask. But the word American, the way that it has been co-opted to mean a person from the United States, quite accidentally, I might argue. But nevertheless, it truly has come to mean, a United Statesian person. And that can be a point of some irritation for other people in the Americas who are citizens of the Americas, that there are so many different American cultures and American people. And yet around the world, when you say the word American, it has a very New York, Hollywood connotation. And so I was very cognizant of that when I was writing, and just trying to be mindful of the characters and, how, if I was Lydia, how would I articulate these things? And I tried to use language that felt like it would be authentic to her. So, I chose not to use the word American in the book, except for in that one moment. And in that moment, it really felt like a nod to all these things that I'm discussing now. Like, it was a sort of acknowledgement of all the territorial ways that we've come to use that word. And I hoped that it would evoke in a reader some kind of reflection on those things.
Yeah. And it's true, because when you say, oh, we're American, you don't think about South American, Central American, Canadian. No, it's always the United States. It's always, and it is usually New York and LA. It's like, you're sitting there saying it. It's not even the Midwest. It's just, right. Oh, America. There's two different coasts. Let's talk about the character of Luca. He's precocious. He's smart. And I remember you're saying that somewhere on the way, I think that your nephew inspired him a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us more about Luca, who originally the whole book was, centered around him. So Luca comes from where?
So my nephew's name is Eamon Lopez, and he is 15 years old now, but he was about Luca's age when I started writing this book in 2013. And he's a really remarkable kid who was nonverbal until he was, about 4 years old. And then when he started talking, we quickly understood how brilliant was his mind. He has a photographic memory for certain things, and among those things are geography and topography. And he's really like scary amazing when it comes to this stuff. My sister lives in Maryland, and they will drive to visit me in New York, and he can glance at a map before they leave the house, and then like 200 miles later he'll be like, you need to make a left turn at the next light. And she's like, what? He remembers it. And so I always thought that was astonishing and would make great fodder for a fictional character, and people would be like, it's not even believable, but it's real. That's what he's like. And I think I always had it in mind that I wanted these characters to remind readers that, first and foremost, they're people. They're they're regular people. They're not different from us. That's kind of the whole point of the book in my mind, is that any one of us could find ourselves in Luca and Lydia's shoes. And I think we have a tendency in this country particularly to think of migrants as different, as other. They are not quite like us, and they are. So I wanted Luca to be the kind of character who would remind people of that he is just like our kids. He's just like my nephew.
And at the very beginning of the book, he's afraid to go inside by himself, and he wants his mother to go with him. And everybody's going, no, you're babying him. And she just realizes, because she's got this motherly bond with him, that that's what she needs to do, that she needs to be there for Luca at that moment. And it's just that, just seeing that connection there and thinking back on that later on is such a big thing in that story, because everybody else would have said to her, like, let him cry through the night, let him just go do this. And her doing that just showed that bond, and how that bond was a good thing. It was a really good thing.
Yeah.
He ended up saving her. So towards the end of the novel, Soledad sticks her hand. This is when I talk about this book, this is the line that I remember and tell everyone. Sticks her hand through the fence, and she wriggles her fingers on the other side. Her fingers are in El Norte. She spits through the fence, only to leave a piece of herself there on American dirt. And that was this line that when I think about this book, and I think about this child standing at the other end, this girl standing there, and all she wants to do is get there. And if she spits across the border, she feels she's had some moment of success, and what that must feel like. And I felt that was one of the most powerful parts of the book, because you realize the longing that this girl had. And she just wanted to be so much a part of this place that she really didn't know that much about, but she felt that it was where she needed to be and where she wanted to be. So when you wrote that line, am I on the right track of where I was with that?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different tracks, right? But to be sure, like, that's the one line where I use the word American in the book. That's it. That's the only place that word appears. And there is a notion in that moment of how arbitrary that line in the dirt is. It really is just, it's so random. It's like, this happens to be the line, like the guys a couple hundred years ago rode through here on their horses and like dropped and then we had a war about it and moved the line. But it's random. And yet it's the difference between life and death for so many people, One of the things that I had the privilege of doing when I was conducting my research was I attended a wedding at the border in El Parque de Amistad in Tijuana. And the bride was a Mexican national. Her 3 children were United States citizens, and her husband-to-be was a United States Marine. And she had been deported and could not return to the United States. So the kids were remaining in California with her mother, who was undocumented. And so they had to have this wedding at the border fence, so that both parts of the family could attend the wedding through the fence. And watching this woman, this young lady, in her wedding gown with her beautiful shoes on and her veil, and at this rusty, sort of grotesque fence, reaching her fingers across to touch her family on the other side on her wedding day.
Mm-hmm.
It really, like, I don't think I'll ever forget that, the
Mm-hmm.
imagery of that. And I think that was very much with me. The emotion of that moment was with me when I was writing about Soledad's experience arriving at last at that fence.
And you're at that moment. Years ago, we had friends that lived in Rouse's Point, New York, which is the border of Canada. And they were saying, if we walk across the street, we go to Canada and then we come back. And we were on vacation. I forget, might have been 11 years old or something like that. And we were just like running back and forth to Canada, like, oh, look, we could just go out and play. And you realize that this was not that same kind of world. Like if we went, what was going to happen? We'd come back. And here I was thinking of that also, because there's this line where you can't do that. You can't just run and come back. You can't run and do all these other things. And as a result, everyone feels like they're locked in and they're locked into their lives and whatever. Readers have told me that they see this book as a call to action. And when my book group read it, one of its members said that she had thought about immigrants as others, but after reading this, she wanted to fly down to the border and volunteer. Like she said, I was just ready to get on a plane because I just never thought about this quite the same way. And there's a line out there that if you're a person who has the capacity to be a bridge, why not be a bridge? Did you want people to think more about being bridges after reading this book?
Absolutely. I mean, that is, look, I know it's super unfashionable as a writer to admit that you have any kind of ulterior motives. But that's why I write. The books that move me, the books that have always moved me when I was a kid, were books that provoked empathy in me and made me want to understand what it might feel like to be someone else, to put myself in the circumstances of a person who didn't have the same comforts maybe that I had. And those are the stories that move me. And so I've always wanted to write the kind of books that will provoke that kind of empathy in people. And if there's, on top of that empathy, if it's urgent enough to transfer the empathy that you feel for these characters onto the people in the real world who desperately need this empathy, all the better. Absolutely. Nothing could make me happier than that.
This week I read A Rip in Heaven, which is your memoir about an incident that happened in your family, which was your first book. And I am so moved by this book. I am not completely finished. I confess that I did read the acknowledgments at the end where you were talking about the victims and, talking about the victims. I'd love you to tell readers a little bit about this book, because anybody who's read American Dirt, if you're looking for another piece, and we'll be talking about all of Jeanine's books, another book to take a look at, I would do this one. If you could just tell them about this, because I feel like a lot of the emotion that went into American Dirt is emotion you actually understood about loss and longing.
Yeah, thank you. So Rip in Heaven is the story of a family tragedy that I experienced when I was 16 years old. My family, we were visiting our aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents in Missouri and for spring break. And my brother was out with my two cousins one night and they were attacked by four strangers. And my two cousins, Julie and Robin Carey, who were sisters, were gang raped and thrown off the Chain of Rocks Bridge in St. Louis. And they died. They both drowned. My brother was also beaten and forced off the bridge, and he was the only surviving victim of the crime. To be sure, there is a bright line between A Rip in Heaven and American Dirt. And I think with all of my books, actually, in that experience, surviving that trauma, and then also the experience of writing about it, taught me that I want to be the kind of writer who always pushes the story out of ownership of the violent men and puts the survivors of trauma, or sometimes the people who don't survive trauma, but the people who suffer, into the driver's seat of their own narrative. The reason that I wrote Rip in Heaven, I mean, there were many reasons, but among them, it was the fact that, you know, because my cousins died, because they could no longer speak for themselves, the four men, the four perpetrators of this violence, got to be the ones to tell the story. And I was so angry about that. I watched while my cousins over the years got sort of demoted to like a footnote in their own murders. And it made me absolutely infuriated. And, you know, and then I recognized, I think, from that experience that this is typically how we tell stories in our culture. We give the microphone to the guy with the gun. And we very seldom ask the consumers of violence, whether we're reading about it in books or we're watching it on Netflix, we very seldom ask the consumers of stories to reckon with what it might actually feel like to be the people on the flip side of that violence. And I feel like that's a more, important point of view, frankly. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels there, to be sure.
And I felt like I got to know your dad reading that book. I really felt like there was your dad so much on the page of what he's doing to protect your brother, because your brother's put in a very uncomfortable position. I don't want to give away too much about that book, because I want readers to go out and read it and have the same kind of experience that I had just going in and reading it. But you'll understand so much about the family bond, and you'll see why you write so brilliantly about family, just because of the extended family that was in that situation together. I mean, you're on spring break and your whole life turns upside down. And I just kept thinking, your dad wanted to leave that following morning. And we're going to be on schedule. We're going to put our bags in the car. This is it. We're taking off. And then everything just changes. And it's how life is. You're moving in this one direction and then everything can just change. And it's what happened to you. And you can sit there and see, I saw threads of that emotion in American Dirt. Like, I'm glad I read the books in the order that I did, but it's a lot more telling after reading that book as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You know, it's one of the things that I think it's important for people who have questions about American Dirt to understand about me, is that I'm not writing from a place of entitlement. You know, this book is drenched with my own personal grief. You know, I wrote it from grief. It is, you know, I wrote it in the aftermath of losing my father. And to be sure, I brought to bear on these pages a lot of my own trauma and my own life experiences. So, yeah, that's not nothing, I think.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's also to be going through it when you were 16, you were impressionable. Yes, you're older than Luca, but you're the same age of those girls that are trying to get across the border, and very much understanding that not knowing of what's happening. And reading that book, I understand how you could write those characters, because it's not knowing what's going to happen at any moment. I mean, you're just, one day you're eating dinner and the next day your life is completely flipped upside down. And
Yeah.
and that's what happened that day at that shooting. It was like, then the life switched.
Yes. And also the way that sometimes grief by needs takes a back seat to the survival in the moment of when your family has been victimized in that way, in a very violent way. You know, there are more pressing concerns than crying, you know. And so I think there was a lot of that in American Dirt as well, just the need to survive and get out of this moment and into the next.
Yeah, and the story of your brother and what happens with your brother, it's about him just getting through. It's like, and when you read it, when everyone reads this, you're going to understand exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not going to give away too much because I want you to enjoy the book going into the same kind of experience that I did with it. You know, besides Rip in Heaven, you've written 2 other novels, and we will get back to American Dirt, but I just want to stay on this. The Outside Boy and A Crooked Branch. Outside Boy was coming of age, and Crooked Branch is about 2 mothers from very different times. So those books also have influence on you when you sat down to write American Dirt. Like, you've written about the mother, you've written about a coming of age of a child.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because from a superficial viewpoint, the books could not be more different. All four of them, really. I mean, some of them have more things in common than others, but they're very different, and which would drive any editor crazy. Like, you know,
You're
you're
not
doing
just
what
writing this
now?
kind of book.
Yeah, no, it's always something totally different. Like somebody's expecting me to write sci-fi next or something. They're very different. Um, but yeah, I mean, the thing I think when I wrote The Outside Boy, that was my first novel, and the experience of writing and then going on tour for A Rip in Heaven was incredibly painful. And um, I think I was just trying to get really far from my own life. When we wrote that book, I was like, let's put that away and try to write something that wasn't so close to home. But the problem that I quickly realized is that, with fiction, if you're doing it right, I think it doesn't matter, how you dress your characters up, where you set them, they're you, you know?
Hmm.
And they have that sort of universal human thing, I hope, that transcends the boundaries of their the cover. It doesn't keep them, so you can't run away from your own psychology as a fiction writer. It will follow you even if you're writing like hobbits or stormtroopers or
They're
whatever
going to
that.
do these things.
Yeah,
They're going to do these things if it's you.
yeah.
You the one elephant room that we haven't talked about is the whole controversy that happened when this book came out. And boy, was there a lot of controversy. And boy, did that just surround. And I was sort of taken aback because I had just read this fabulous book that I just wanted everyone to read. We had 10 book groups crazy about this book, and then the world erupts. And I saw in an interview that you shared that Oprah said something to you when you were talking to her in the book club. Can you share with her what her words meant to you and what she said when you were in this really dark, tough time?
I mean, there were so many things that she said to me throughout the difficult months of the controversy that were really helpful. She's an amazing woman. And it was so comforting to know that she is exactly who I hoped she was, who she appears to be. Um, but among the many things she repeatedly said to me, always return to your intention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're safe there, because it's very clear to anyone who reads this book with an open heart what your intention was, and you did it, so you're safe there. Return to your intention. Don't worry about what people say, or the loudness of some of the hatred. She also said, you can't be a woman in this world, in this day and age, and say anything of value without having to navigate some hatred. That's just that's part of the deal. And Oprah knows of hatred, she's been through it. So she really grounded me. There were times when she I think she felt slightly outraged. I remember her saying at one point, like, how dare anyone tell me that I was not supposed to feel
Mm-hmm.
the things that I felt when I read your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so grateful to her for having the courage of her convictions and standing by me and standing by the book, even when things got very heated. I was really grateful, really
Mm-hmm.
grateful to her.
Those were days where it's like it was just like an attack from every single side, and then it also becomes an angry mob going after as well, and it's like the pile on kind of a thing. And I just sat there, kept saying that this is just a really good book. And my book club was reading it, and they're like, well, what's the controversy about? And people were saying to me, like, I don't get it. Like, I just think this is like a really interesting book that's made me think, and it's made me move in these other directions. And I found that was so gratifying to me because that's the way I had felt at the beginning as well.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. I mean, the thing is, I should just say, I've had 10 months to unpack this, and I've
mhm.
only scratched the surface. I feel like I'm still going to be doing that in the nursing home. Like I think it was so multi-layered and so complicated, and there were so many different elements to it.
Mhm.
But I think on the most superficial level, I can understand why, look, voices of color, particularly Latino voices and hyper particularly Mexican voices, have been undervalued and underrepresented in publishing for a really long time.
Mhm.
Um, I have to say there were some just outright fabrications about who I am, and there were a whole lot of kind of distortions and things that were written in bad faith. So, and unfortunately, Twitter doesn't have fact checkers.
Mhm.
So, you know, a lot of the stuff that was kind of shared about me was outrageous and infuriating. And had I been reading it on Twitter, I would have been like, oh my God, that's crazy. Why is she the one? You know, she doesn't deserve this or whatever. I think it's unfortunate that the tenor of the conversation was such that I feel like nowadays when we disagree with someone, instead of saying, that's interesting, please help me understand, I hadn't considered that before, instead of saying that, we say, you're a piece of shit and you deserve to die.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's what happened. And so, um, you know, I think the moment actually turned into something, I'm happy to say, that appears really productive in the publishing industry. There was a reckoning. I think it was long overdue.
Mhm.
And publishers are responding in real world ways, you
Mhm.
know, in order to fix the representation problem for Latino writers in that industry. But I think it's always going to be a little painful and confusing for me to try to figure out how a part Puerto Rican woman from a working class family became the sort of poster child for white supremacy in the publishing industry.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
was, yes, kind of like surprising to me too. And also, I think that we've gotten to the point in this world where everything is right or wrong. It's right or wrong. You are either the pile-on or it's this is, and there's no discussion. It's, I mean, really, I feel like Twitter and a lot of social media is a lot of yelling and screaming all day long. We stay away from politics on our websites. I'm not going there. And I'm sitting there, we're talking about books, we're talking about this and that. And I just find that the pile-on is the scariest part to me right now, because all of a sudden, if you say something that's not what everybody else is saying, you're now wrong. And
Right.
it's like, and that's the part I'm having the huge problem with, is you can't even sit there and say, well, I feel this way. Well, you're wrong. And I'm,
Yes. Well, vitriol is our new national pastime, unfortunately,
mhm,
I think.
mhm,
And it is frightening because even at the height of the controversy, when things were rabid and like really vicious online, I was flooded with support privately. People were, you know, all kinds of people were emailing me behind the scenes to offer me their support, but no one wanted to say it out loud because they were scared. You know,
mhm,
there are very few people who want to stick their neck in a guillotine, and they don't want it. They don't want the mob to turn on them. So, I do think it's a little alarming what this may mean for free speech among people who are supposed to be the arbiters of free speech. Writers, where, God, I mean, we must, absolutely must be able to like truthfully say what we think about a book
mhm, mhm.
without fear of like tanking our career, you know? And it's it's a little it's a little bumpy out there right now, but we'll figure it out.
Well, I have to say that when I see there's, the best of lists are all coming out the end of this year. And every time I see that this book is not on one, it's to me like, then they made a mistake. I'm being perfectly honest. And I'm not just saying it because you're sitting here. I've really felt this on every time I've taken a look at a list. And that's the reason I'm really excited that the Goodreads Reader's Choice Awards has got this book as a finalist, because that's the readers sitting there and speaking. And it's not a group of people in media saying they're saying this is what's going on. It's the right thing to do. And when I picked it as a Bets On, I don't care what anybody thinks, I thought it was a Bets On great book. And I have been telling people all year to read this book. And you want to sit there and then I remember I sat with my book club and they're like, what is the controversy? Can you sit there and explain it to me? So we're talking about that, not the book. And I said, let's go back to the book. Like, let's go back to how good the book really was. And they were all moved by it. And that was the book that we walked away from, one of the groups I was in. That's the way they felt. So those were really some crazy months. And As a result, you and I didn't get to bond earlier. We didn't get to hang out earlier, but we're doing this now. And now we're going to do something. When we originally sent out this invitation, I asked our readers if you would like to ask questions of Jeanine. And we went through and we found some readers, and we're going to do this polling them up from the audience. We'll see how this goes. It's the first time, first of all, guys, this is the first time we've done a book club live. Okay, let's start there. This is the first time we're using this piece of technology tonight. We've Zoomed before, but not with this platform. So let's just bear with us. So first, one of our live visitors is Evelyn from the Syosset Public Library in Syosset, New York. So Evelyn,
yes,
there we go.
Hi.
Hi, I'm so glad to see you.
Thank you.
Just like Carol, I absolutely loved your book.
Thank you.
I found the first few pages riveting. So my question for you is, what was your research process like?
Oh, okay. I love that question. It's usually where I start these conversations because it's a long answer. I'll try to be concise. I started by reading everything I could find, and I everything from fiction, nonfiction, news media from Mexico. I even read like doctoral theses online by Mexican grad students, who were writing about migration studies. And then, when I felt like I had a decent foundation in the sorts of things I wanted to know, I went to Mexico and I visited the migrant shelters and I visited orphanages. I volunteered at a desayunador, which is a soup kitchen for migrants. And I just tried to talk to everyone I could find who I understood knew a lot more about this subject than I did. So I talked to the men and women who run the shelters. I talked to the lawyers who are doing the pro bono legal work of representing unaccompanied kids, humanitarian aid workers, people who are documenting human rights abuses along both sides of the border, scholars. And then I talked to a lot of migrants themselves. And I have to say, whatever trepidation I had, whatever resistance I had, and there was a lot of it, to writing this book in Mexico. When I went to those places and I met those people and I listened to their stories, it really makes you sort of confront your own cowardice. When you see, there is a remarkable gentleman by the name of Cesar Uribe who runs an orphanage in Tecate, Mexico. And this guy, when you see that people have absconded from comfortable lives and put themselves bodily in harm's way to stand between danger and vulnerable people, it makes you confront the reality that it's like really ridiculous to be afraid of writing a novel. And so it was really, really helpful to actually be there and talk with those people and listen to their experiences rather than just reading about them. That was really key for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Evelyn. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we've got Terry from Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and she's going to come on with her question. So Terry?
I know better too. Hi, I'm so honored to be here. I'm the granddaughter of immigrants from the Middle East. And so this book touched me in ways I didn't expect, in spite of how different the stories are. My question is this: there's some details you describe along their journey, particularly hopping the freight trains, that every time they tried to get on a train, I held my breath.
Mm.
I was so fearful for them. As you researched the novel, what challenges that the characters experienced did you go out and hop a freight train?
Oh God, no. I want to live. I am a mother of two beautiful girls, and I remember talking to my husband before I went to Mexico the first trip, and he's a great guy and he's very supportive, but he was also like, a little mad at me that I was doing this. And, you know, he was adamant that I should take great care and not put myself at any undue risk. And I'm not trying to be a dead person anyway. So I was quite happy to be very careful. So the trips that I set up, the research that I conducted was very controlled. I had introductions to every place that I visited. I had, in most of the cities that I visited, I had a guide who would take me from one place to the next, and show me around and stuff like that. So I did not ride La Bestia. I did read a marvelous book by a Central American author, Oscar Torres, maybe, called The Beast, which I highly recommend. He did ride La Bestia all the way, I think, from Chiapas to the border, and conducted interviews with the other migrants on top of that train while he did that journey. It was really eye-opening. And then I met a lot of people who rode the trains, and I listened to their stories. But no, I am not that heroic
Good.
by a long stretch. So
I'm glad to hear it. We need you around to write a lot more books. Thank you so much for taking my question.
thank you.
You know, it's interesting. Showtime has a show on called The Trade. There's this documentary series called The Trade, and the people are riding La Bestia. And I've watched the first season, and the first season was set really in the drug culture, in the drug world. And I highly recommend watching the series after reading this book, because a lot of you're going to see the grit. You're going to see a lot of exactly what Jeanine is writing about. And in the beginning is about the cartels and cultivating crop, and who's getting killed in the mountains and whatever. And then from there, we go into this other side of what's going on of people, like later on. It's 2 different seasons. So I encourage people that as a companion piece to go sit and watch that as well, because you'll see how boots on the ground her research really was, just because you're seeing exactly how random that violence is. And exactly, from this documentary, how people's lives are at risk at every single moment in these towns. And they're just going to work and something ends up happening to them. And
there's another really great book that I recently read called The Book of Rosie, which is, I believe it's the first memoir written by a woman who was separated from her children in ICE custody. The author is Rosaira Pablo Cruz, and it is beautifully written. I thought it would be depressing, but her voice, it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and a lot of parallels, again, to American Dirt and her experiences. So
we'll make sure we put that in the show notes, so that when we have the video of this running, you'll be able to see what that other book was as well, because we encourage more reading. Like, once you've read something on the topic, to read more and see it from a different point of view. I think it's just helpful, because you realize how authentic the storytelling is. So Terry, thank you for joining us. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
So now I have a question from someone who's not with us tonight. It's Marcia from Odell, Iowa, is asking. She said, your research into the Mexican cartels allows you to write with such realism and clarity. How are you able to do so without feeling the threat of the plight of our journalist in the story?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I never, ever, ever felt even mildly worried about my own safety, but probably because I was such a lower mid-list writer and no one actually cared about what I was writing before. So, I was not in any way on anyone's radar, I think, the reason that I wanted Sebastian, in the story to be a journalist is because this is one true thing. A lot of the statistics in the book are true. And just like, I think 3 weeks ago in Mexico, there were 2 journalists murdered within 24 hours of each other. It remains, if not one of the most dangerous countries in the world to be a journalist. The free press is critically endangered in Mexico. And I think it is, it's really frightening. I think it's the it's sort of the last thing to topple before you have a failed state. So the journalists who are doing this work, this investigative journalistic work in Mexico of actually telling the truth about the cartels, are absolute heroes. And I, so much of what I learned when I was researching this book, I could not believe that it's not like the lead story on every newscast every night in this country. This is happening largely because of our drug policy, our immigration policy, our foreign policy. We have a symbiotic relationship with these countries. We are partially responsible for what's going on down there. In some ways, we're very responsible, and yet we're like, nobody wants to look at it. It's all well and good when we are sort of consuming it in a sensationalized way, but I really feel like we need to reckon more realistically with the damage that's happening. And I've really gotten off topic with what you asked me. I took a complete detour, but I really think it's important for readers to understand that, the Sebastian story it's not outlandish. Mexican journalists who tell the truth about the cartels are dying every week in horrific massacres like this. So, a massacre where 16 family members are all killed in one day is not common, I should say. But it's also not unheard of, as it should be.
And it's living in fear of telling the story, living in fear of telling the truth. We have Diana from Louisville, Kentucky, and she has some questions for you as well. So can we find Diana?
Well, I'm here in voice.
Great.
That's good.
And I fell in love with the book with the first 2 chapters. And I decided to make a slow read and be a little more scientific and trying to figure out what your use of Spanish words and italics. It would seem very deliberate, but it was kind of random, and it hooked me even more.
Oh, good.
What were you trying to do with that?
It took me a long time to figure out how to use the Spanish in the book. So Spanish was my first language. I was born in Spain, and my family's part Puerto Rican, but I learned English when I was like 5 years old, and I forgot almost all my Spanish. So my Spanish now is dodgy. It's not great. But I understood that the characters in the book, if you can do that work as a reader of suspending your disbelief, they're speaking Spanish the whole time. So how to sort of indicate that the book is actually happening in Spanish while I'm writing the book in English. So it was tricky to try to get that balance right. So the formula that I eventually landed on was that the first line of every piece of dialogue, every conversation, the first line is in Spanish to sort of indicate a transition in my mind. That would, the rest of the conversation also happens in Spanish, but the writing switches to English. If that makes sense. And then
it acted like a spice. It added to it. Yes.
Thank you. And then, any words that were swear words, she swore in Spanish. And I'll be honest with you, every time I write a book, I will get at least one letter from someone who says, I really loved this book, but was it really necessary to use all the expletives? And typically I write back, bleep, 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 or something. But I thought this was a really great out from getting that particular letter. I could just put all of her swear words in Spanish and then not have to get that. Anyway, so that was, and then there were some phrases that just don't translate, and they, I kept in Spanish as well.
Well, it was lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for joining us. Appreciate it. Now we have a question from Ronnie from Port St. Lucie, Florida.
Hi, I'm in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and it has finally turned a little cool here, which we love. So I just wanted to say that I love this book, and I would put it in the same vein as To Kill a Mockingbird, which formed my view of justice and inequity in the world. And when I read it as a ninth grader, so it is my life. It is exactly who I am, and that's what this book did for me as well. My question is that the book reveals the many reasons immigrants leave their home countries. Did your research show how this compares to the descriptions and the reasons of why immigrants leave their current situations and yearn for entry into the U.S.?
Can you just say it one more time?
Sure.
So
I actually changed it because the grammar was so bad in the beginning. The book reveals the many reasons that immigrants leave their home countries. Did your research show how this compares to the descriptions and the reasons of why immigrants leave situations and yearn for entry into the U.S.?
yeah, I love the way that was phrased, and I wanted to make sure I understood how the two parts of the question were connected to each other. But it was important for me because Luca and Lydia are atypical migrants. You know, they are people of means, and they have a lot more comfort at their disposal than most of their fellow migrantes on that journey. And so because of their sort of unusual circumstances, it was important for me to make sure that I represented pretty heftily throughout the book a more typical migrant experience. And when I talked at the beginning of the story about, or at the beginning of our conversation about Lydia being a middle-class woman and why did I choose to make her that, and I didn't have a good answer, but as the story evolved, I really liked that she could be the lens for the reader when we meet all of these other migrants whose stories are probably demographically more typical. You know, there are more Soledads and Rebecca's, to be sure, than there are Lydias. But, you know, there are Lydias as well. It's not, you know, so I think, and then also all the other people that they meet along the way, that you know, the brothers, the migrant farm workers, the people who are migrating for from poverty, from the violence of poverty, not from the violence of violence, but, you know, to feed their families. All those different push factors, those were the kinds of things that I learned about in my research, and I wanted to make sure were well represented in the other characters in the book.
Yes, and including the character that was trying to escape from the cartel. He didn't want to be a cartel member anymore.
Yeah, yeah, Lorenzo,
that was sad.
I think what's so terrifying also is that she's being followed, like she's being tracked. And that, I think that was the part of the book that gave me the most chills, is he is following her and does know exactly. And there is this every single moment, like you're still being checked out. You think you're running, you think you're trying to get to the United States, but you realize you're still being tracked the whole time as well. I think that was so terrifying to me, to be thinking that, you know, you're thinking just one part of the story is the problem of trying to get across that border, but there's also this other huge trouble. And I think that you've done such a good job of portraying that is another huge part of what's going on. It's not just getting away, it's just getting there, it's getting away.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny, I don't mean to let, it's been such a surreal experience to listen to other people interpret the book through the lens of their own experiences. And sometimes I hear people describe things about the ending or whatever that I'm like, what book was that you were reading? But, you know, I don't mean to, I never meant to suggest that the US is somehow like home base, like tag, I'm safe now. That is not the case. You know, I ended the book when they arrived in the United States because the book had to end at some point, you know? And I wanted to provide the reader with that little modicum of a sense that they had survived their journey. But then the afterword, I hoped, would serve to function as kind of a reminder to the reader that nothing is great, you know? Like, she does not have the life she should have. She does not have the security that she deserves to have in this country. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. But I like that, you know, a lot of people have asked me to write a sequel, and I don't want to give anyone that comfort. Like, I want people to have to not, you know, to have to live with that same not knowing that, you know, that unfortunately so many people in Lydia's shoes have to live with. So
there you go. So thank you, Ronnie. Thanks for joining us. So now let's talk about the title. And for that, we're going to Roberta from Evanston, Illinois. Roberta and I have a history. Roberta's a former bookseller. I think you two may have met somewhere along the way. I'm not sure. So Roberta, I'm going to let you take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Carol. It's so nice to be here and to meet Jeanine. Oh my goodness. I read the book as you did. I read it in June 2019. And I just was thrilled. It was my favorite book. I talk about books to everyone, and I wanted to hand it to them, and it took too long to come out, but I was so excited, and it is my favorite book. So I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with the title, American Dirt?
Oh,
is it named? Well, I have a few suggestions you can wipe out, but
yeah.
Is it named for the land where the immigrants are heading for? Or does dirt refer to the difficulties ensued by the immigrants trying to reach this safety? And then my last option, in a way, thought was, or is it the irony of reaching America and finding all the many difficulties? And as you just said, finding out that nothing is great.
Yeah.
Calling it dirt.
Yeah. The answer is yes. It's all those things. You know, the reason I loved this is the only book I've ever written where I came up with the title very early in the writing process. I always write the book first, and then it's excruciating. I will fill like a whole loose leaf notebook with terrible titles before I finally find one that I don't hate, and I'm never fully satisfied with them. But this one was different. I stumbled upon this title early in the writing process, and I knew immediately that it was the right title. And I like that it does this very thing that you just did so eloquently, Roberta, which is like, it makes people ask themselves all those different questions. It is ambiguous enough that it can mean so many different things. And I think it does. And people can project onto the book what they think it may mean at the beginning, and then those ideas might shift as they read. And I think it means all of those things. And I think, you know, in my mind, the whole book takes place on American dirt. You know, Mexican dirt is American dirt. It's part of the Americas. And I wanted to evoke the sort of arbitrariness of that thing, that line in the desert, that it's that dirt on that side is no different from the dirt on this side. It's all the same dirt. You know, it's crazy. Maybe our dirty little secret, the way we treat migrants in this country as well. Not such a secret anymore. I think in recent years, it's become quite clear where we stand on that as a nation. We need to get our ducks in a row, you know, and return to the principles of being a refuge that we purport to be in the world. And so there were a lot of different elements that I think could play into the title. And I liked that it could mean so many different things. So thank you for noticing so many of them.
Well, it was very successful, and thank you. Bravo.
Thank you.
And it's good to see you, and you and I have to catch up again soon.
Yes, absolutely, Carol. Thank you.
Now, let's talk about the cover, since we've talked about the title. And for that, we're going to go to Nancy who's a bookseller from Oskaloosa, Iowa, who has a question about the cover. So Nancy?
Hi, Jeanine.
Hi, Nancy. I know you.
Ronnie said about comparing the book to Killing Mockingbird. That was just awesome.
Oh.
I'm a fan of covers, and usually while I'm reading the book, I figure out why the cover is what it is. With yours, I didn't catch it. So I'm wondering if you knew about the cover before, like you knew what it was titled. Did the people at Flatiron have a lot to say about it? And what do those bluebirds mean?
Yes, so this was not the original cover, and it's so different from what the original. I fell in love with the first cover that they showed me. So deeply in love. I was like married to that cover, and then they showed it to the sales force, and the sales reps were like, nope, it's all wrong. It was like too literary, it was too dark. And they were like, we've got to go back to the drawing board. So they brought me this cover. They brought 5 covers actually in the second round, and this was one of them. And I got to tell you, it was my favorite of the 5, but I was so married to that first cover that I was like, not loving it. And it took me a long time, and we had many meetings about this cover and then after we kind of made up our mind, I called my agent and I was like, we need to have one more meeting about that cover, because I just need to feel like I said my piece. And we did. We had one more meeting about it, and Amy Einhorn was amazing. And I said to her, I just don't know. I love that other cover so much. I'm not sure what this cover means. But I said, look, you know what you're doing. You know the market. This is her end of the business. She's the publisher. So I said, if you believe this is the right cover for the book, I will go with it. And she said, I believe this is the right cover for the book. And she was right. Now that the book is out in the world, I absolutely believe that it's the right cover. It's fresh. It's really memorable. I think it's very pretty. I think her sense was that it looked like Spanish tile. I don't see that so much. But what I loved about the bluebirds was that sky color. I have spent a lot of time at the border, and every time I am at the border, I love how nature makes a mockery of the border patrol and the border itself. Like there are always birds perched on top of that wall, and like just deciding which way to fly today. And if you go all the way to one end or the other, you will see that the fence actually tapers into the ocean. And, the waves just wash back and forth between the bars. And there's something really, I think, powerful about standing at that place and knowing how much suffering it has provoked for people, and seeing how the world carries on and ignores the intrusion of this wall. And so I felt like the birds beautifully evoked that feeling for me, having been a person who spent a lot of time at the border. But I don't know. I'm not sure why they picked them. I'm just glad that they did. I like it. I like the cover. I think it does go with the book.
I snagged a look at somebody in the chat, and they said
one was your favorite one the German?
No. The German one is totally different. The German one is
really,
yeah, it's very gritty. No, I'll have to find the original one. It's not anywhere. You haven't seen it. It was only in-house at Flatiron, but it was beautiful, but it was very quiet. It was a graphic kind of black and lavender. I can't even describe it, but it was like, it looked sort of like a desert, but not really. It was pretty. It was just really pretty. But so is this one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good seeing you.
Thank you. You too.
I just jumped down and looked in the chat for 1 second. Something popped up, and somebody said they thought it was the shower tiles where the shooting took place. They said that's what they were thinking of. That was the tiles.
I've heard that.
There you go. Myrna from Wading River, New York could not join us tonight. So I'm asking this question for her. What effect did you wish to have on American readers' views on immigration through the telling of the stories of your characters' journeys through the United States? So you were really trying to wake us up of what was going on?
Yeah. Look, if I'm being honest, am I allowed to say that now? I mean,
Please be honest.
I did. Yes. I mean, I do think it's unfortunate, but like, I know I'm not supposed, I'm, as a storyteller, I'm supposed to be above all that and not, but the fact of the matter is, yes, I hoped that I would provoke enough empathy in the reader that they would transfer that empathy onto our neighbors, and that it would remind people that we should be invested in the solutions to this problem, because we are certainly part of the causes, So, and to that end, if you will pardon me, I am putting right now in the chat box, I just put my, I've been running this charity, this fundraiser for the International Rescue Committee. I am matching all donations up to $100,000. The money will go directly to fund programs in the borderlands, mostly programs that serve and protect women and girls. It's a brutal, I mean, in 2019, a migrant died every 16 hours in the borderlands. And I fully expect that number to skyrocket this year. Between COVID and the Remain in Mexico policy, more and more people are venturing into the desert and they are dying. So the International Rescue Committee is doing great work there, providing relief to people who really, really need it. So anyone who is able to donate, I'm super grateful and very happy to match those donations.
And we'll be including that in our notes as well, so that you can make sure you can find that. And I know that a lot of book groups that have been meeting with Jeanine have going out to donate, and we're hoping that people actually do this. And it doesn't have to be a big donation, whatever you can afford.
Yes.
Guys, your $5 thing, it's matched. You know what I mean? It's like, really, just go out and sit there, and you don't sit there and say, if I don't do $100 donation, it's not about that. It's about participating.
And every dollar
something.
Honestly, because if everybody who read this book gave $1, we'd have $1.3 million at this point for.
Yeah, I think that's just something to think about. And now we have Michelle from Alton, New Hampshire with us, and you have a question.
Hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So like many readers, I've read more books this year, I think, than ever. Like for me, I've read about 45 books, nothing like Carol, but and this by far was definitely the most unforgettable for me. It woke me up in many ways, and I loved your writing from the first sentence to the last. And as an aspiring writer, I would just love to know, what's the best piece of writing advice that you've ever received?
Oh, okay. So I love that question, because I thought for a horrible moment that you were going to ask me to give you writing advice, which I'm really bad at. And I usually say, just don't. That's my advice. Don't do it. It's terrible. But that's a terrible joke also. But I was just talking to a writers group last night, and I was reminded that a friend of mine who I'm no longer in touch with, but a Native American writer, said to me once, you have to write like a white dude. Just write like you deserve it. Like, be arrogant. Don't censor yourself. Just tell every story, like go all in, like and then he said, you got to swing for the fences. Like every time you have to write the book like it's your last book, like it's your last chance. And I really took that to heart with American Dirt in a way that I didn't previously, because it did feel like my last chance. My 3 previous books were all modestly published, and I have a family and I have, responsibilities, and my poor husband and I were like, maybe we should look at getting a bank teller job or something. We were like, this was the book. Like I had to make my best go of it for this time. And And I think what he was really saying when he said, write like a white dude, was just let go of any fear that you don't belong or you're not good enough. Like, just write it, you know? And that was really key for me. I took that to heart, and I intend henceforth to always write like a white dude, I think.
There you go. And then does that mean you can swear more?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess it depends on the white dude, but
maybe you can swear in English, not just in Spanish. You'll be able to just swear in English as well. It'll be totally
I haven't stopped. I've never stopped swearing in English. I try not to swear on Zooms because I don't want to offend anyone. But you know, even occasionally one of my children will be like, "Mommy, don't say that word."
See that's a bad word. That's a bad word. That's a bad word. Michelle, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, we did have Karen from Oak Ridge, New Jersey, who couldn't be with us tonight, did ask if you could contemplate the story of Lydia and Luke in America, what would their future be like?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, look, I want every good thing for them. And I think that's why I needed to leave them where I did, because I didn't want to let the reader off the hook. I didn't want to give them the pat happy ending. You know, I wanted people to be a little uncomfortable not knowing that, you know, will they be okay? Are they going to get asylum? Will they someday obtain the security of having documentation? I don't know. I mean, they absolutely deserve it. And Lydia she's an incredibly resourceful woman, who is fierce and brave and, you know, will fight and advocate for her child. She also has the tremendous benefit of being fluent in English. So she is someone for whom the odds are pretty good that she will be able to advocate her way into the rightful things that she should have for her child, which is safety. You know, but unfortunately, there are lots and lots and lots of people in this country who deserve those things and don't ever manage to get them. So I don't know. He will win a scholarship and he will go to Harvard and he will conquer the world. That's what I want.
I think he should get all the scholarships. You know, they always put that kid on nightly news. He applied to every Ivy, every top school, and he got into them all. Okay, that's going to be him. Absolutely. That's definitely going to be him.
I'll take it. Yes.
Definitely going to be him. Austin, do we have any questions from the audience that we should be, because I'm being terrible at looking at the Q&A?
Yeah, we do.
Oh dear. Okay, you're on, Austin. You're Q&A in it.
So first I want to say there was someone in the chat that I have been trying to keep up with it while I've been doing everything in the background. But one thing stood out to me, which was when you were talking about violence. Mary Barker said, the news quotes statistics, American Dirt put a face to these numbers. And I just think that was very telling, you know, of you as a writer and the book that you brought us. So I wanted to say that as a thank you.
Thank you. That's the ultimate, that's everything. That was exactly why I wrote the book, was because I feel like sometimes the statistics are so overwhelming that it's almost impossible to individuate and to recognize that, like, okay, this woman who is a woman is being murdered every 2.5 hours right now in Ciudad Juarez and in Tijuana, every 2.5 hours. That statistic is so horrifying. It's so overwhelming that it's impossible then to consider who these women are that are being murdered, 12 a day. And to imagine that they are someone's daughter, that they are someone's sister, that they are someone's mother. That's the whole point of writing fiction for me, is to expand that kind of empathy for people. And I think I don't understand why we're failing in this regard when it comes to Mexico in this country. We are incredibly, I felt, even in 2013, I felt like we were incredibly, sort of generous as a country and clued in when it came to caring for Syrian refugees and Afghanistani refugees. And we were donating lots of money. And the International Rescue Committee will tell you this. Their programs in other parts of the world are well funded, but a very similar program at the Mexican border, at the US-Mexico border, it's severely underfunded. People are not paying attention. And I didn't understand why. I still don't understand why. And, you know, that was, I think, one of the most sort of fundamental things that lit the fire in me to want to write this book. So it makes me really happy to hear that for some readers, they feel it was successful in doing that. That's everything.
Wow. So I'll ask a few of the questions. One of them is, do you speak Spanish?
Yes, Spanish was my first language. Well, that was too quick of an answer, because the answer is like, I try, lo intento. My dad always told me that I spoke terrible Spanish with a beautiful accent. So I think that's about where I'm at. Yeah, it was Spanglish really was my first language. But my parents put a hard stop on Spanish at home when I was about 5 years old and my brother started having trouble in school. We stopped speaking Spanish at home, so my Spanish is no longer what I would like it to be. But I do have Duolingo on my phone, and I try to study it every single day. So one day I'll be fluent again, I hope.
7 years of Spanish, and I can't do any. So there you go. 7 years. Awesome.
Somebody asked, I listened to the audio version and it was so good. Do you have a say in who read it, and have you listened to it?
Yes, and yes. Yareli Arismendi is the narrator, and she was incredible. We had so many auditions, and she was my choice. And I could not be more thrilled. She did this almost impossible thing where she read the book with a kind of breathless intensity and also like utter calm. I felt like she captured the character of Lydia so incredibly well. Her accent is beautiful. And she's an amazing actress. So I was really, really happy with her performance. And we've actually done we did at least one event together. There's a book club called the Walking Book Club, and it's everyone listens to the audiobook, and then while they're out exercising, and then they get together and discuss it. So Yareli and I both went to that book club together on Zoom, and it was wonderful to hear her talk about her process as well. She's an amazing actress.
That's great.
Somebody asked, is this violence happening in places like Mexico City and larger, more progressive areas? And then what do the newspapers kind of say in those larger cities, or what are those newspapers like?
So I will confess that in recent months, really since this book came out, I went into a bit of an ostrich posture for a few months and wasn't looking at a lot of media. But this time last year, I can say that Mexico City was largely cushioned from the worst of the violence. And then the violence, I don't ever want to give the impression that Mexico is like this lawless, incredibly violent place. The murder rate in Memphis is higher than the murder rate in Mexico. It's just that in the places where there is violence, there is no recourse. So my husband just read me a headline literally on my way into the office this evening. There were over 400 police officers murdered in Mexico in the first, I think, 6 months or 9 months of 2020. And that is the thing. It's that there's impunity. So where you have places where there are these pockets of violence, when there is a turf war, for want of a better description. And then if you happen to be in one of those places, or you happen to cross the wrong person, there's impunity for the people who do the violence. That's the real problem. It's not that it's so much more violent than other places. It's that, the violence works sort of in tandem with the corruption, and to produce this really terrifying impunity, so that if you find yourself on the wrong end of that violence, your only recourse really is to leave.
Somebody asked about the ending of the book. Did you have other endings? And if so, what were they?
This was always kind of the ending. What's funny was that after the book that went to auction, that sold to Amy Einhorn, was 40,000 words shorter than the book that you guys read. So I'd say 30,000 of those words are in that final third of The Crossing. So it was very rushed in the first, in the draft that went to auction. It was, I think I just needed to slow it down and be in those moments more and expand them emotionally and really dig in. But the sort of logistical stuff was all there, with one notable exception. And that was that in the earlier version, Beto survived. And I will blame Amy Einhorn for this, the editor. She's the one who said to me, you know, if your hope with this book is really to give people a kind of realistic scope of, you know, what a crossing might feel like, there's no way all of them would make it. And then she was like, we all know who wouldn't make it, the asthmatic kid who's unprepared. And, you know, but I was so loath to do it, and I resisted for a long time. I knew she was right. But it was really painful for me to write that crossing, or, you know, his passing. He was one of the only characters who survived from the two previous drafts. It was Luca and Beto. So I spent 5 years with that kid. I did not want to see him go. It was rough. But, you know, on the other hand, when Stephen King emailed me to give me his quote, the one thing he said in the email was like, oh my God, Beto. And I realized that it was necessary, you know, for people to feel his loss. Like, you know, he's not even a real person. And there are real people out there dying in that desert at a rate of like several every day. There are kids like Beto dying in that desert, you know? So Amy Einhorn was right.
I agree, because I think if everybody made it, it's like, okay, great, miracle story, but this was the real tension. There's a real tension going back and forth. And when that happened with him, it was like, wait, everybody's not going to get there. And it also made you wonder what else was going to happen.
Yeah.
It was like that gauntlet went down. Now where do we go from there? And
also, I think for me as a writer, it underlined how futile, like the inhaler is like 4 miles away. You know, he didn't have to die. There, you know, if we had better policy and if we had better solutions and these kids didn't have to venture into this awful scenario, he did not have to die, you know, and that the futility of that, and the futility of every death, the futility of all those, you know, 400 something people every year who are dying out there in the Sonoran Desert trying to get into Arizona. It doesn't have to be like that.
You know, it's also reminded me of, there was a 60 Minutes piece that was on, I want to say it was about a year ago, March. I can't remember exactly the timing. I'll try and put that in the show notes as well. And it was the border down where McAllen, Texas, and going across the border there. My son had spent time on business down in McAllen, Texas, and he went into Mexico. Their plant was down in Mexico, and every day he'd go. So this is how he describes he's going on his first business trip. I want you to know, Mom, I signed the life insurance policy, and we will be going with the armed guard across the border every day, and we're staying in the United States. And I'm just there like, wait a second. My first business trip was like a fashion show in LA. Like, what is going on? And so we were watching the 60 Minutes piece one night, and he's like, this is exactly what it's like. It's like, this is exactly how close it is. And I think that we always think when you really even just think about the border, oh, it's there. No, it was right there. It was right there every single day. And he said they would say to them, when you go into the plant, don't go anywhere by yourself. Like literally go with the guard wherever you're going. And he said, and they said, if you're kidnapped, we will pay the ransom. I was just there like, wait, this is a lot going on in this whole trip. And he said, because you just understand when you get there exactly how scary it is and how tense the whole situation is. And so when I felt like I was reading this, I was thinking of that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like Mexico's a huge country, and it has just as many, I mean, the cultural differences from one state to the next as well. And the security differences, it's the difference between being in like downtown Detroit from being on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which actually now since the pandemic maybe aren't so different, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's all in pockets. And, but yeah, the security, it's not great in the border towns specifically right now. Not good.
Do we have a couple more questions, Austin? Or
we have one more question, and it might be a good one to end on, which is, you've mentioned policy, and Jonah asks if you think that, showing the plight of immigrants in this book if you think it will have an impact in our American politics and policy.
Oh gosh, I mean, that would be super self-aggrandizing if I, I mean, look, I believe as a writer, I believe in the power of books to win hearts and minds, I mean, I know that it happens because it has happened to me over and over again. And so if you can reach one reader at a time and kind of open their heart to something that it may have been closed to before, and then they can find a way to take that compassion to the ballot box or, into their local legislation somehow. Or maybe they take that compassion and donate to the IRC, or they begin volunteering at, a local organization that supports migrants in their community. Whatever way that compassion can hopefully express itself in the reader, that's all I can hope for. And in the meantime, I will advocate with all my might directly to my legislators to try to get the policy improved, because there is so much more we could be doing easily. It's not even, I'm here to tell you, I have done probably like 200 to 300 book clubs this summer. And this is not a partisan issue. It's purple. People across the board have compassion for immigrants. I think there is a lot of sort of political posturing going on both sides that is preventing really simple solutions from happening. And I think, we need to hold our legislators to account and demand better from them when it comes to this issue, I think.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I have a question for you. Are you working on anything right now?
Oh God, no.
That's fine.
I'm working on.
We've had a pandemic and homeschooling. You've had controversy, pandemic, homeschooling. It's been quite a year. It's been quite a year.
I am ready. I am about to begin. I have no idea what I'm going to write. It has changed form so many times in my mind already, and the only thing I feel sure of is that it will piss people off. I don't know yet, but it's taken me 10 months to get my head screwed on straight enough where I feel like I can potentially write, and I won't be writing into my fear. I can write something. So we'll see what it will be. I don't know. Well, it's coming eventually in like 2047, maybe.
Well, I am glad you've gotten to that point. For readers, there are more books back here. Definitely Rip in Heaven, just because I've read it and I'm reading it. I'm not right to the end, and I'm actually savoring it. So I would heartily recommend that. And Jeanine, I'm so glad we finally got to do this,
Thank you.
because I've really wanted to have this conversation. I want to wish you much more success with this book. I want readers to go out and tell more people. This is a book to give this holiday season. This is a book to sit and have a lot more conversation about.
Vote for it on Goodreads, please. Please
go vote for it on Goodreads, of course. Go out and vote for it on the Goodreads. And it's because it is the reader's choice. And I really want to make sure that you're really going out and letting your voice be heard if this is the book that you loved as much as I've been seeing flashing in these comments all night tonight. I look forward to seeing what you do next. I look forward to seeing you in person somewhere along the way. I want to being part of the special first tonight. It was the author I wanted to have first, and I'm so glad you were a part of it.
Oh, it was really lovely. Thank you for this lovely conversation and all the great questions. And it was a really nice evening. I'm sorry that we couldn't do it in person and have like a glass of wine with it, but this is the next best thing. So.
This is the next best thing. It's definitely the best thing, especially these days. At least we can get together this way. You know?
And Jeanine, no, the whole time the chat has been filled with praise and thank yous for you for coming on with us. So thank you.
And we will cut and paste that praise and send it to you. We will send that so that when you sit down to write the next book and you start stumbling, you can just paper your walls with that and say, oh, these people, they're all waiting for the next book.
I never get tired of reading nice things. So I appreciate that very much.
That will definitely be coming. And we look forward, we'll have you back. We'll have you back when we'll make a pact right now. Even if it's 2047, it's okay. We'll be waiting. I'll be a little, maybe I'll really go gray by then. Okay.
Yeah. I'm still going to be dying by then. Fine.
I'm Italian. We're going to be dying right into the box. Trust me. Trust me.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you so much. And to everyone, I would like to share for our attendees, our next Bookaccino live event is going to be on Thursday, January 21st at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And our guest will be William Kent Kruger, and we're going to be talking about This Tender Land. So we'll have more about that, how to go sign up on reading group guides, Book Reporter newsletter for that. Wishing you all a happy Thanksgiving. Jeanine, happy Thanksgiving. We've got a lot to be grateful for, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. And thanks for joining us, everyone, tonight. Till next time.